Before I share my screen, I wanted to say hello to everyone and say how grateful I am for being invited to this amazing seminar. Thanks to Jorge, thanks to Azucena, thanks to everyone who watched my film. Thanks for showing it. And, you know, this was really amazing 2 days of presentations. I connected to many of them. I think that in what I'm going to be talking about today, I will be resonating with Pablo Arturo, with Leandra, with David, with Miriam, with Florencia, with Diego, and right now with the last presentation as well. So if I don't do it explicitly, implicitly, all these presentations dialogue with mine. And in a way, I'm going to be talking about dialogue. So I'm going to start like that. Do you imagine time in life when there will be no problems to solve, just nothing to do? I think that this time will never come, and maybe it's good that it will not come, because I think that our nature and nature of life is defined by solving problems. And actually, these problems may turn into causes, and they may mobilize alliances that fight struggles and win them sometimes, like in the story that my movie talks about. The alliance that was mobilized around the problem of transgenic soy in Yucatan was, as you probably noticed in the film, a transdisciplinary alliance. It was led by Mayan beekeepers, supported by other groups of Mayan people, but it would not have been possible for this alliance to win if it were not supported by scientists, by lawyers, by social workers, by anthropologists, and even by business people, right? And policy advisors, communicators, media. So when I was coming here to Uruguay, because I still think I'm with you guys, very respected and appreciated friend, I told him that I was going to be talking in Uruguay about transdisciplinarity, and he said, well, transdisciplinarity is just a methodology that's boring. So I felt poked, and I was thinking about it, and I got into the conclusion that transdisciplinarity is a very, very special kind of methodology, one that allows problems to acquire protagonism and some sort of agency. So today in my presentation and in the way that I've been thinking about transdisciplinarity, in which I deeply believe, and I know that I'm preaching here to acquire, I imagine problems with agency, problems that are actually calling people and giving them the task of solving them. And these are the most beautiful problems which are really giving meaning to people's lives. So let's share the screen and let's start with my ideas. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the conceptual complexity that surrounded the film. The film was sought for public humanities, so I could not render all the conceptual research that preceded it and that we led along while we were making the film for the last 5 years. Do you guys see the screen and everything? Do you see the screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. I'm not seeing you, so I wanted to make sure. And also I'm going to tell you a little bit about my reflections concerned with how come that this struggle achieved a victory, considerable victory. It doesn't happen, and there are so many environmental, social conflicts all around the world, and they're in a state of constant struggle, but they seldom achieve victories as a Mayan alliance. So I'm going to propose, this was my reflection, that when we talk about problems that turn into causes, we need to think about them in 3 frameworks. Or in other words, we think we should be thinking about building three kinds of bridges. Transdisciplinarity bridges between different disciplines and obviously involving humanities. I will talk a little more about it explicitly or implicitly during my talk. Very important for me in my work in Mexico, but also elsewhere, relationships or bridges to the more than human world, other species and ecosystems. Maybe the best concept to embrace it all would be land. And also interculturality, to which I arrive in the conclusion of my talk, which is an aspect of the first two categories, but which I want to kind of draw out of them because it became particularly important in what happened after my movie, which I will also tell you a little bit about. So transdisciplinarity. I think that there is a lot to be said about transdisciplinarity, but for me, I want to think about it as a dialogue of knowledges and memories. Knowledges are always already memories because they are based on stories that are informations gathered through time, right? And if we talk about dialogues, we already talk about humanities. We should be the masters of communication. We should be able to question and remake different concepts, concepts which, as we can notice, like during these 2 days of our deliberations, there are concepts which, appear very, very suddenly, and there is a lot of debate about them. Those of you who are in international organizations know that, there is a debate if we should talk about bioculturality or biocentricity, if we should talk about food sovereignty or food security, right? And there are a lot of interests connected to those problems, and a lot of power can be gained through the usage of one and not the other. And then there are also problems which we inherit from 19th century systems, which were colonialist, sexist, racist, and we somehow forgot to revise, right? So we're in that process of revision of all these concepts. And I think one of them is the construction of the relationship, the concept of nature and the relationship between human and natural. And I'll talk a little bit more in a second about it. But one of the questions that I kind of want to pose and came to my mind as I started reading works of environmental humanities was we already including transdisciplinarity knowledges of non-academic actors, right, of indigenous people, very importantly. But is it only the human knowledge that we should include? Is it really that only humans remember? Well, you can see on the left side of this screen, Stella, here in the area where I live and work right now. People believe that stones remember better than people, and stelas are Mayan stones which commemorate some victories of Mayan kings hundreds years after those events. They are still here. So as I said, I am brought up, I'm the children of environmental humanities, and beginning of 21st century, as you all know, again, I'm preaching to the choir, scholars begin to ask themselves if it's only economy, if it's only business, if it's only the legal institutions that are responsible for the environmental destruction, or is it also humanities, right? And if it's humanities, what are the problems in humanities, how they could be transformed? And one first thing that came to in many publications was the division between culture and nature relegated to the place of resources, usually invisible slaughterhouses, houses famously constructed outside of time and nature as something that we can consume, that we can get to know, that we can examine, but that we are somehow separated from. So these are just very, very few examples of dozens of amazing publications that somehow started asking questions, you know, Jane Bennett asking, can matter act? Marisol de la Cadena asking, can mountains be political actors? Michael Marder asking, can plants sing? Eduardo Kohn asking, can forests sing? And then Bruno Latour and Levi Bryan saying, can we think about the world without the hierarchy between subject and object? Subject that has superiority, subject that imagines, subject that consumes, subject that examines. Let's flatten this hierarchy. Let's imagine the whole world as a set of objects only, and networked in ways that we construct based on observations. And notice that, you know, this kind of flattening of the relationship between subject and object appears in many indigenous thoughts. Although they're not just objects, they're, as you heard, Pedro Pablo Chimbacap saying that in my film, they're only subjects. And I think it's a bit better idea to have only subject, not only object. So anyway, I started to follow these questions, these provocations, intellectual provocations, also connecting it to remembering my father's work in the garden and dialogues with plants. And you remember in the film Lady, at certain moment, Lady is the woman who won environmental prize, Golden Environmental Prize. She says, well, we were here, we Mayan people were here first. Corporations came later, and that should be important. This is an argument used in many, many contexts in different debates in the whole world. And the concept of biocultural memory, coined by two important Mexican ecologists, Victor Toledo and Barrera Barsols, supports the claim that, yes, it is important who was here first, because it explains that people, after many, many generations of life in certain territory, really acquire a very, very deep knowledge of, you know, how to work with that territory, when to plant, when to harvest, when to hunt, how much, where should be the moon when things are being done. So I was very impressed by that concept, but I thought, hey, is it only humans that remember? Or is it also that the land can remember, the plants can remember? So I was then working in Tehuacan in Mexico. La Mixteca is one of the poorest areas due to drought. And two amazing activists brought there the plant of amaranth. Amaranth is one of the plants that is constant in my research. I was very interested in it. I read about its history. And the plant was brought to that area because it had been cultivated by many, many pre-colonial people precisely in that valley, and somehow making civilization flourish. So I asked myself the question, you know, how would Amaranth remember the story of that valley? How would Amaranth reflect on what is happening to the world, right? And obviously this is a very, very obscure metaphysical question, epistemological question. How should we imagine memory? How should we imagine thought? How should we imagine knowledge? So my work in the framework of interspecies started in collaboration with biologists and entomologists, Aina Suriana Rainan, with whom I worked for quite a while. He also helped to do research for the film that you saw. He's also an author of the book with Daniel Kleinman about colony collapse disorder titled Vanishing Bees. And we actually started our work in the interspecies framework, where we are now in the La Plata area. And this image on the left side of the screen comes from where Miriam works, right in at the area of Cordoba. These are Malvinas Argentinas, and very interestingly, the mural painted by in a completely white suburb of Cordoba, Argentina, also connects to the framework, epistemological framework of indigenous people. So anyway, we get to Argentina because we hear that transgenic soy is creating a lot of problems for people. The application of glyphosate is the highest per capita in the whole world. People are sickened, and children are being born with malformations. So resistance is being born. And this is human resistance that struggles to establish zones of space between the areas which are fumigated and their dwellings. But then there is also another kind of resistance. There are weeds which acquire resistance, biological resistance to the glyphosate that is a part of the package of transgenic soy, and they grow very deep roots. It's very hard to pull them out by hand. They grow in the fields, and then these fields have to be abandoned and forest return to these areas in a way supporting the struggle of activists. So we talked about an alliance, actually two alliances. One was the alliance between Amaranth and the activists, and you can see here how that was represented in the artistic and literary discourse of resistance in the area. Actually, the image raising resistance with the fist comes from a documentary film that made by two German film directors about Paraguay, when you can see the implicit interspecies struggle where weeds and humans fight together. But we also witnessed in real life tracks of what was called amaranth bombs. People made little balls out of mud, and they put a lot of amaranth seeds inside, and they threw them into soy plantations, hoping that the weeds will take over. Then the amaranth was the most aggressive of those weeds. Right now, I believe it's Sorgo de Aleppo. Anyway, there are thousands of those weeds, which are probably the greatest problem for the transgenic plantations, and at the same time an ally of activists. So when I heard that transgenic soy had come to Yucatan, and that Mayan beekeepers were protesting, resisting because their bees were being affected, I flew to Yucatan and began started research together with Sai Suryanarayanan about what was happening in Mayan territory. And it was also then when I met Angel Polanco, whom you saw in the film. He's here in the article where he publishes a press article about the results of his research. As you heard in the film, he is working on toxicity, showing that the levels of toxic substances in the water in Yucatan are much higher than any international national authorities could allow for it. We also wrote together, so he is a part of Maya Land, as you remember. He's talking about his work there, but we also wrote an article together titled, I don't know if you can see on the screen because it's a small print, Toxic Bodies, Water and Women in Yucatan. So that article was inspired by the idea of transcorporeality from Stacy's Alaimo work. And we asked ourselves, what did all the bodies that we could think about in the context of Yucatan and toxicity, what did all the bodies have in common? And obviously, that was precisely the porosity, the fact that all of them were unprotected from the flow of toxic substances. And in Yucatan contexts, it was particularly dramatic because, as you heard, the karstic structure makes for no barriers for the toxicity to flow in, fill in the underground basin, and then flow through all the bodies. So what is the significance of that conceptual structure, or that conceptual proposition that we made in our article? Well, again, that is questioning the modern idea that the skin is actually separating us from the world, that we can separate from the toxicity, that toxicity can be deposited in some place and will not affect us. And I think these are very important conceptual transformations, to what extent our bodies are part of the world, but also, as we were discussing that little bit yesterday, are our minds a part of the world as well? When we talked about the ecology of the brain, is that our brain is separated from the world and our thoughts are inside of our brain, or are they actually out there flowing? They are the world, and we only own the perception capacity. So are we thinking inside of our subjectivity, or are we thinking outside? Is the world thinking and we only perceive it? So all these questions, that were not visible in the film, were surrounding our research. And finally, after 5 years of working in Yucatan, we published this big material with a lot of revisions, and basically 3 years of revisions in the International Journal of Critical Geography, titled Milpa Melipona Maya, Mayan Interspecies Alliances Facing Biotechnology in Yucatan. So if you want to find a little more about the history and details that the film is talking about, but more in depth, that might be there. And after all these years, we gave a lot of significance precisely to the relationship of Mayan people with their land, especially the bees and maize, or milpa, because milpa is much more than maize, as you heard in the film. We thought that that struggle was eventually victorious because of that relationship that Mayan people had with the bees for thousands of years. And when the moment came and some bad things started to happen in Yucatan in terms of toxicity, the bees let Mayan people know, and Mayan people always learned from the bees, so they reacted in a very strong way. So, for example, remember Latour. Latour says that scientists are those who speak on behalf of the non-humans. So in our story, that was a little bit reverted again, but because it seemed like it was bees that spoke on behalf of Mayan people, the alliance, international scientists, organizations, NGOs, media, that was built around the bees, or around the relationship that Mayan people had with the bees. And Mayan people could allege their right to culture only because of that thousands of years relationship with the bees. So I'm thinking that when we think about these social environmental problems, of which we have so many in Latin America, it's always important to look at this relationship, which are often invisible, hard to think through, on the background between the land and the people. So that brings me to my last slide and the conclusion, but this is an important moment of my talk, interculturality and the problem. Another set of problems. When I arrived here to Mexico after the problem that the alliance, that the film is talking about, won their struggle, 3 years after, I arrived here as a Fulbright scholar, solving thousands of my own problems on the way, very situated knowledge, the one that I'm acquiring right now. I noticed that the alliance showed, to put it gently, signs of fragility. You remember, well, the first part of intercultural instability in Yucatan is definitely brought by Mennonites. There are lots of tensions around Mennonites. They are growing and going down, but there is a lot of different differences in approach to how to deal, how to think about the presence of Mennonites in Yucatan. But this is not the only tension. So you remember Stefan Palmieri, French educator who came to Mexico and founded this Melipona Maya Foundation that you can see that's the entrance to his hotel. The foundation doesn't exist anymore. Why doesn't it exist? Well, Stefan Palmieri believed that the way to save the bees and make them repopulate Melipona bees that were threatened with extinction was to commercialize with their honey. That was the same that Lady Patch did. Lady Patch also established a little commerce with Melipona bee honey involving local women in that. But that's not what everybody thought that should be done. The more radical factions of Mayan intellectuals believed that Melipona bees are sacred and we should not commercialize the sacred, right? And so very interestingly, concept of market, maybe we should not talk about, North and South, maybe we should talk about the cultures which are kind of surrounding market, right? And this way of thinking which is steered by the market is very different from the thinking that happens in the cultures of the sacred. These two concepts are hardly compatible. In the case of my story, they were not. One of those Mayan intellectuals who believed that Melipona honey should not be commercialized accused Stefan Palmieri of biopiracy. And there was a proceeding. He was found innocent. According to Nagoya Protocol, he did not commit anything, any acts that he shouldn't have committed. But you know how it is when someone is accused, it's very hard to really clean an image. And Palmieri gave up all his activities in this field. Because he also collaborated, and you can see the logo in the left part of the screen, with the Intercultural Mayan University of Quintana Roo, and this university also has Melipona bees. I'm stationed there right now. They, together with Palmieri, were thinking about expanding Melipona bees economy to other parts of Yucatan. At the moment when the problem with Palmieri arose, university got into problem, and that led to a conflict between various Mayan intellectuals, those more radical ones, and the university, which found itself quite alienated from its own culture just because of this connection with Palmieri. And there were obviously other issues. There are also thousands of issues. So they accused, Mayan activists accused Mayan University of academic extractivism, right? And the university is mainly Mayan University, but it's intercultural. So it has people from different parts of the country teaching there as well. And there was another event that happened. You can see the last image on the right side of the screen of a different film. You can see Lady Patch on the cover of that film, and the title, Que les pasó a las abejas, tells the same story that my film tells. And I have to say that it's made by the real film director. It's really beautiful. It had much more funding, so it could, it used much better equipment and came up with a very poetic rendition of that conflict. I really recommend this film. I wrote also an article about it, and I'm in love with it. But that funding that directors managed to get, part of that funding came from one of the foundations did not allow them to free the film. So another conflict arose between Mayan protagonists of the film who wanted it to be released free on YouTube so that they can use it in their own educational projects when they would want, and the director of the film. And so the director was also accused of artistic extractivism. There were another case when scientists published data and article after interviewing Mayan milpa growers about their agricultural calendar. So this is an issue right now. In my book, I have a chapter with the title Academic Extractivism, Open, taking notes. And actually tomorrow there is a seminar organized, interestingly, by Mayan academics and Mayan activists about academic extractivism. But the last image on the screen, it's me. And so, I obviously am also an intercultural element in all this landscape, and I'm writing a book. And what am I doing here? I'm a Polish woman working in the United States and asking Mayan people to share their wisdom with me. So very, very afraid not to be committing any kind of academic extractivism. So ways that we have our strategies that we use sometimes not to be extractivistic and that we talk with indigenous people about are such like, co-authorship of the publications, which I did in the past, but I'm asking myself, why do they need to be, co-authorship? What does it give to them? Something that they also mention always with conversation is bring the knowledge back to us. And I think Diego or David talked about it, or Pablo, the same notion that the knowledge needs to be published in the local language, and the people who helped to produce research should have access to it. So I brought that my film. I didn't have any funding that limited me, which has good and bad consequences, but I could share the film, bring it back and give it to officially. I downloaded it in a number of zip drives and gave it the showing at the University of Quintana Roo to Mayan leaders. There were 135 people in the room, so the film was very well, very appreciated by the people. That was one step that I am very happy I could have made, but I'm still uneasy about the knowledge that I'm producing right now. I'm trying to write a book about the debates in Mayan culture in the biocultural context. And I'm wondering, what can I actually give of the people who are giving me their wisdom? And, I am getting to the conclusion that that actually what they really enjoy and want from me is a dialogue, kind of honest, maybe not negotiating of my knowledge or our knowledges, our common knowledges, because negotiating again bring the market to the equation, and maybe we could just talk about talking, dialogue, sort of common understanding, which I think everybody appreciates. But this is the point that really has me quite uneasy. And I would welcome any kind of feedback, precisely, particularly about that intercultural danger of interculturality.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You have a couple of minutes.
But okay. I'm done.
Okay. No, thank you so much. And maybe we can give applause. Thank you for your presentation, and now we open the floor for questions and comments. Maybe I can start with one, if that's okay. I really like your presentation and what you told us about the movie that we just saw before starting this afternoon session. I wanted to ask you about the concept or the idea of interspecies. or multi-species. Where does it come from, this theory or idea? I think you mentioned something about the Rio de la Plata tradition, because I'm mostly associated with the more than human anthropology coming from Australia, Deborah Burrows and all that. But maybe you mentioned another trace, and I was curious about that idea.
Yeah, there is an article by Puar and Livingstone. I can look up the reference that brings this idea for the first time. And later, there are a lot of publications about multi-species ethnographies, right? And multi-species knowledge production coming from Australia, as you well mentioned. We had a multi-species melon workshop at our university, and I believe a couple of conferences. And, you know, most of the books that I showed on the screen are sort of multi-species ethnographies, beginning with Con, ending with the La Cadena, and, you know, there could be many others in between. And each of them, you know, I obviously simplified the questions that they are posing. Because of the time that was limiting me, I didn't go to the subtleties of their thought, which is admirable. And the subtleties are needed because you know, our language needs to grow, and these concepts need to be, even if they can't be imagined, even if they cannot be thought, they need, at the same time, they need to be imagined and they need to be thought. We need to be making effort, you know, redefining nature, redefining thought, redefining our mutual relationships. So I don't know if you want me to go further in any of the directions, or are there
no,
other
that's
questions?
okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think you answered. More questions or?
Hi, Kata.
Hi.
Happy to see you. Happy to know that you're feeling better also. As I told Henrik yesterday, and Isabel and Ana Paula this morning, we wish we were here, but we are happy to know that you are actually feeling better. I'm a little bit still under some wonderful input yesterday. David took us to this place in which in Florencia and Esteban also, to if Saras can be the kind of place in which we can be more open and transparent about the things that we had to unlearn in order to tackle these new things, or a place in which we can talk about certain things that happen as mistakes. But now I realize we're still broadcasting, so maybe we're not sheltered after all. But if what would you say one or two things that were most challenging for you in this transition? And I want to also clarify that Kata, some other colleagues in the United States, faculty in literature departments are making a switch in trying to produce a different type of product, in this case, a moving collaboration in transdisciplinary setting, as opposed to just another book. And they are taking a lot of risk and a lot of chances. And so I wanted to know if you will feel comfortable opening a little bit more about that, but probably stick to one or two of those issues. And I think that will give us plenty to think about.
Well, this is a very easy question, Jorge. I mean, situated knowledge, situated in the body. I think in the transdisciplinary research is a research to which you go with your body and you give with your body. And maybe people who are in their 20s or 30s have it easier, but I'm feeling that challenge every time I like pinch my finger with some lock or get into close to accident situation, or for this purpose get food poisoning, because you know that the intercultural relations extend to, you know, eating with people and eating their food, and for example not asking if this is made from purified water or not, right? So all this has that's one of the greatest challenges. Second challenge is that I'm away from people that I really love. You know, I left my 14-year-old son at home, and some other people that I care very deeply about. So I think that this brings us to, if you want to talk more in terms of kind of knowledge production, into that notion of situated knowledge. In terms of academia, you know, I'm just being evaluated. It's my post-tenure evaluation that is not very consequential, because I'm a senior scholar and not being challenged in any way right now. I mean, I don't want to say that I'm not being challenged. I am being challenged. For example, collaborative articles are being questioned all the time by the colleague who is preparing the report. Why so many collaborations, and what did this person do? And I'm saying, no, this was just an activist that whose knowledge I benefited writing about this problem. They did not write. Now you'd have to tell me exactly what percentage of the article this person wrote and what percentage you wrote, right? So these are sort of academic limits and academic structures which also appear there, and in my case they are not that significant, but I imagine that for young professors who are beginning their tenure track career, they may be very, very significant.
More questions or comments? No. Oh, in the chat, do we have something? No. Okay, then we thank you for your presentation, and for also for the movie that we were able to see before, and we maybe welcome the next speakers. Thank you, Kata, so much.